Mary sat at the dinner table, eyes cast down, fingers nervously tracing the edge of her water glass. The smell of her mother's famous spaghetti filled the room, but it was a silence that pressed against her chest. Across from her, her younger sister, Daisy, picked at her food, oblivious of the tension that hung thick in the air. "You know, Mary," her father began, breaking the silence with his usual gruff voice. "We've been talking about it, and we think Daisy's future might be a bit more important." Mary's heart skipped a beat. She had heard those words before. Her parents had always favored Daisy, the easygoing younger sister, the one who needed less pressure. Mary, on the other hand, was the eldest, the one expected to set an example, to excel. But this felt different. It felt like her dreams, her future, were being crushed under the weight of Daisy's innocence. "What do you mean, Dad?" Mary asked, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. Her father's voice softened, almost like he was speaking to a child. "Well, we've been looking at colleges, and honestly, Princeton might be too much for you, Mary. We don't have the funds. Daisy's got a better shot at getting into a good school, you know? She's more well-rounded." Mary's breath caught in her throat. She had always dreamed of going to Princeton. Since she was a little girl, it had been her goal, her lifeline. But this wasn't a conversation. It was a decision. The decision to reject her future in favor of her sister's. Her mother chimed in, her voice warm but detached. "I think it's for the best, sweetheart. We don't want to stretch ourselves too thin, and Daisy's always been the more practical one. She'll need that education more than you do, and she's going to be the one who helps with the family, you know?" The word stung. But it wasn't the first time they'd made it clear that Daisy's future was more important than hers. She tried to hide the sting, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if the wood could anchor her. "I'll go to the state school," Mary said through gritted teeth, the bitterness seeping through. "It's fine." The room fell into a cold silence, her parents exchanging knowing glances. They had made their choice. She was expendable. That night, Mary sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the poster of Princeton that had hung in her room since she was 12. Her dreams felt like a cruel joke now, faded and distant, something that had once felt within her reach but had now been yanked away by the pull of her family's expectations. But there was one thing they didn't know. Mary wasn't going to let her dreams die. No matter what. The next morning, she woke up early. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed, the cursor blinking in the empty space where her thoughts had to come to life. She wasn't going to settle for less. She wasn't going to be forgotten. Mary dove headfirst into her passion, coding. She spent long nights learning, building, testing, creating. Every line of code was like a defiant message to her parents, one she could send without needing their approval. By the time Mary graduated from state school, she had created something extraordinary, a task management app called Taskmaster. What started as a personal project became her ticket out of the shadows of her family's expectations. She sold it for $5 million. But success, it turned out, came with its own set of traps. As the ink dried on the contract and the money hit her bank account, Mary knew something had changed. Her family, who had never truly supported her, now looked at her with new eyes. They didn't see the daughter who had worked for her future. They saw the financial windfall. "Mary, sweetie," her mother called one afternoon, her voice dripping with a kind of sweetness Mary didn't trust. "I know it's a lot, but Daisy's wedding is coming up, and we could really use your help with the costs." Mary's heart sank. She knew what was coming next. "And if you could, just hear me out, maybe you could buy her a house. You know, something to start her life with." The words hit her like a punch. The same family who had dismissed her dreams were now expecting her to provide for theirs. All those years of unspoken pressure, of her feeling invisible, now felt like they were about to suffocate her. She swallowed hard, trying to hide the emotions threatening to break through. "I'll help with the wedding," she said, her voice tight. "But a house? That's too much." Her mother's expression faltered, but she quickly recovered, forcing a smile. "Oh, honey, it's just a small thing. We'll never ask you for anything again, I promise." But Mary could see the truth in her eyes. It wasn't just a small thing. It was another demand, another expectation, The cracks in Mary's heart deepened, and for the first time in years, she began to wonder if cutting ties was the only way to break free from the weight of her family's expectations. The tension was building, the pressure mounting. This wasn't the life Mary had dreamed of. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to be reduced to just a source of financial support. And soon, she realized she would have to choose. Would she continue to let her family manipulate her? Or would she finally break free and claim the life she had always wanted? The answer she knew was coming, and it was going to change everything. Mary couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the weight of her family's demands pressed against her chest, suffocating her. She had given them everything, her time, her dreams, her sacrifices, and yet it was never enough. They never saw her for who she was. They only saw the dollar signs. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the message lighting up the dark room. "Hey, sweetie, just wanted to check in on the wedding plans. We were thinking maybe you could help with the deposit on Daisy's new house. We're really counting on you." Mary stared at the message, her pulse quickening. They were doing it again. Just like always, they were treating her as if she existed solely for their convenience, their comfort. But this time, something was different. She wasn't the same person who had sat silently at that dinner table. She had fought for her dreams. She had fought for her future. And she wasn't going to let anyone rob her of it anymore. She slammed the phone down, her breath shaky but determined. She had a decision to make. The next day, she met her mother for coffee at their usual spot. The air was cold, a chill biting through her jacket as she walked inside. Her mother was already seated, a warm smile on her face, though Mary could see the edge of impatience in her eyes. She had always known how to manipulate situations, how to make others feel guilty for not complying with her wishes. "Mary, darling, I've been thinking more about the house. It'll be perfect for Daisy and her new life," her mother said, her voice sweet but commanding. "You know, she's the one who's always been there for us. You can't let her down now. It's just the right thing to do." Mary felt her stomach churn. She had been the one who had carried the burden all her life, who had worked tirelessly to make something of herself. And now her family was asking her to throw everything she had earned away, just to make Daisy's life easier. "I can't do it," Mary finally said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. "I've already given you everything I could. I'm not your 8 a.m. Her mother's smile faltered, just for a second. But in that second, Mary saw it all. The manipulation, the expectations, the weight of years of guilt and pressure that had been placed on her shoulders without a second thought. "Oh, come on, Mary. You know we need this. Daisy's going to be your sister-in-law soon. For God's sake, this is what family does." Mary's hands clenched into fists. She could feel the anger boiling inside her, but it wasn't just anger. It was a realization that her whole life had been spent trying to meet an impossible standard. Her family never saw her as a person with her own needs. She was a tool, a means to an end. "Mom," Mary said, her voice quiet but cutting, "this isn't about Daisy. This is about you using me until I have nothing left." Her mother blinked, but there was no guilt, no regret in her eyes. Instead, there was a flicker of something darker, something almost sinister. "Mary, don't be like this," she said, leaning in. "You've always been the responsible one, the strong one. We're your family. You owe us." The words were a punch to the gut, but they weren't new. What was new was how Mary felt now. For the first time, she felt herself stand up straight, her shoulders unburdened by the weight of her family's expectations. She wasn't going to carry this anymore. Not for them. Not for anyone. "I don't owe you anything," she said, standing up abruptly. "You've already taken everything I had to give. I'm done." Her mother's face froze. For a moment, she looked like she didn't recognize the woman sitting across from her. But then her lips curled into a smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "You're making a mistake, Mary," she said, her voice cold, almost venomous. "You won't get far without us." Mary didn't respond. She turned and walked out of the cafe, her mind racing, her heart pounding. She had just cut herself off from the only family she had ever known, And though it felt like the world was crumbling around her, it also felt like the first time in her life she was free. As she walked through the city streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something bigger than just this confrontation with her mother. Her life had changed. Her journey had changed. And the world she had known no longer had any hold on her. Later that night, as she sat in her apartment, her phone buzzed again. It was a call from Daisy. "Mary, I can't believe you did this." Daisy's voice came through the speaker, trembling with emotion. "Mom's devastated. I don't understand. You're our family. You have to help me." Mary closed her eyes, her hand hovering over the phone. She felt the weight of Daisy's words, the guilt creeping in, but she couldn't let herself fall back into the trap. She had spent years trying to please everyone else, and it had only left her empty. "I'm sorry, Daisy," Mary said, her voice calm but resolute. "But I'm not doing this anymore." The line went silent for a long moment, and for the first time, Mary felt the real cost of her decision. But it was too late. She had chosen herself, and now there was no turning back. It had been a week since Mary made the hardest decision of her life, severing ties with her family. A sense of liberation filled the air around her, but the weight of that decision still loomed over her like a storm cloud. She had felt a rush of freedom when she walked out of that cafe, but now, in the quiet moments of her apartment, doubts began to creep in. What if she had made the wrong choice? What if her family needed her more than she realized? Then her phone buzzed. It was an email. She opened it hesitantly. The subject line read, "Urgent. Your family's future depends on you." Her heart skipped a beat as she clicked it open. The message was short and to the point. "Mary, we know what you did. You can't hide from us. If you truly want to abandon us, then we'll make sure the world knows who you really are. Your past isn't as clean as you think. We'll expose the truth, everything. You won't be able to run. Your secrets will be out, and there's nothing you can do to stop us." The words were a gut punch. Panic surged through her chest. Her family had always known how to manipulate her, but this was something different, something darker. They weren't just trying to guilt her into submission. They were threatening her, wielding her past like a weapon. Mary's mind raced. What could they possibly know about her? She had built a life in the open. There were no skeletons in her closet, right? But as she sat there, thinking, the doubt grew. Years ago, when she was just starting out in the programming world, she had made a deal with a shady investor to fund the early stages of Taskmaster. It had been a small, desperate decision, one she had hoped would never come back to haunt her. But what if it had? What if her past had already caught up with her, just when she thought she could finally be free? The phone buzzed again. A text message this time. "We know about the deal you made. You'll pay for your silence. This is your last warning." Her fingers shook as she stared at the message. She had to act fast. She couldn't let them control her life any longer. But the realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. This was bigger than just her family. Someone else was involved. Someone who knew everything. Someone who had been watching her from the shadows. She immediately started to research. She dug into her old records, looking for any trace of the investor she had dealt with. The name had always been shrouded in mystery, a ghost in her past, but she never thought she would have confronted again. The deeper she dug, the more unsettling the details became. The investor wasn't just a businessman. He had ties to powerful people, dangerous people, and now she was tangled in a web far beyond her control. Suddenly, her apartment doorbell rang. Mary froze. It was almost midnight. She wasn't expecting anyone. She cautiously peeked through the peephole. No one, just a quiet hall. But her gut told her something wasn't right. The air felt thick with tension. Every shadow in her apartment seeming to move, every creak of the floorboards louder than before. Then a knock. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped back, her mind racing with the possibilities. Was this the moment her past caught up with her? Was someone from her family finally here to confront her? But when she opened the door, no one was there. Only an envelope, sealed with a red wax stamp, was left on the floor. It was heavy, as if it contained something important, something that couldn't be ignored. Her hands trembling, she picked it up and tore it open. Inside, There was a single piece of paper with a cryptic message written in bold, black ink. You made the wrong enemy. Mary, time's running out. And then on the back of the page, there was something else. An address. The address of a place she had never been before. A place that wasn't far from where she lived. Her pulse quickened as she stared at the address, fear slowly sinking in. This was no longer about her family. This was about something far more dangerous. Someone had been watching her for longer than she knew, and they weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. Mary knew what she had to do. The time for hesitation was over. She wasn't going to be the victim anymore. She had fought for her independence, and now she had to fight for her life. But as she prepared to leave her apartment, she caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the window, a figure standing across the street, watching her. It was the same figure she had seen earlier in the corner of her eye, the one she thought was just a trick of her mind. But this time she knew it wasn't just paranoia. Someone was out there, someone who knew everything. The figure moved, disappearing into shadows. And Mary realized that her fight had just begun. The darkness outside felt suffocating as Mary stood on the edge of the rooftop, looking down at the city lights below. She had no choice but to confront the truth now, to face the consequences of all her decisions. The cryptic address had led her to this place, a secluded building on the edge of town, hidden from view. It was the perfect spot for secrets to be buried, for danger to lurk unseen. The weight of the world seemed to press down on her as she clutched the envelope tighter in her hand, the message still fresh in her mind. You made the wrong enemy. Mary, time's running out. Who had written it? Who had watched her for so long, pulling the strings? She didn't know, but she would find out tonight. As she paced the rooftop, trying to calm the storm inside her, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. You've been warned. We are not giving up. You'll never win against us. Her fingers clenched around the phone. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop until they had her, until they had everything she had worked for. But Mary had made a vow to herself long ago to never let anyone control her life again. She couldn't let them win. The sound of footsteps behind her interrupted her thoughts. She whipped around, heart racing, but it was only a figure cloaked in shadows. She tensed, ready for whatever confrontation awaited her. But then the figure stepped forward into the light. It was a man, tall and intimidating, with an air of power that seemed to fill the space around him. His face was partially obscured by a mask, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were unmistakable. You're the one, Mary said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. You're the one who's been pulling the strings. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You've made a lot of mistakes, Mary. But this was your biggest. Mary took a deep breath, steadying herself. I'm not afraid of you. Fear is the least of your problems, he replied, his voice icy. Your family's manipulation was just the beginning. You thought you could escape us. But we've been watching you. Every move, every deal, every mistake. You'll never get away from us. Mary's heart pounded. She had known this moment would come. But now that it was here, the truth was even darker than she could have imagined. She had been caught in something far bigger than her family's expectations. Her entire life had been a chessboard, and she was just a pawn. But Mary wasn't done yet. You've underestimated me, she said, her voice growing stronger with every word. I've spent my whole life being controlled, but not anymore. I've worked too hard to let you take everything from me. The man smirked. You think you can fight us? We've already won. His words hit like a blow, but Mary refused to crumble. She remembered everything she had been through. The manipulation, the guilt, the doubt. All of it had brought her here, to this moment where she would take control of her own fate. With a quick motion, she pulled out her phone and tapped on the screen, launching the one thing that had given her the power to change everything. Her own creation, the Taskmaster app. She had secretly developed a powerful algorithm within it, a backdoor key that could expose and shut down anyone who tried to control her life. She had always kept it hidden, just in case. As she activated the system, a look of realization crossed the man's face. He lunged toward her, but it was too late. The algorithm had already begun its work, locking him out of his own system, severing his connection to the resources he had used to manipulate her. "You thought you had control," Mary said, as the man struggled to regain access. "But you were never in control of me. You just didn't know it." The man's mask cracked, revealing his true face, a face that once held power but now looked desperate, defeated. Mary had done it. She had taken back her life, not just from her family, but from the shadowy figures who had tried to pull the strings from the darkness. The man took a step back, his confidence shattered. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" His voice trembled. Mary shook her head, her resolve unwavering. "This isn't about winning. It's about freedom. And that's something you'll never take from me again." The man hesitated for a moment, then turned and fled into shadows, knowing he had been outplayed. Mary stood tall, the weight of everything she had endured lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. As the man disappeared into the night, Mary's phone buzzed once more. This time, it was a message from her family. She opened it, almost expecting the same manipulative words she had grown used to. "We were wrong about you. We've realized that we've been selfish. We're sorry. Come back to us, Mary. We need you." But Mary didn't need to read it to know what to do. She deleted the message without hesitation, her finger lingering for a moment before pressing the button to clear the thread. Her family's toxic grip no longer had any hold on her. In that moment, Mary knew she had won, not just against them, but against herself. She had taken the power back, chosen to live for herself, and found her true strength. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be hers to walk. The city below was still, the lights flickering like stars. Mary smiled to herself. The weight finally lifted from her heart. She had come so far, and now she was free to write the next chapter of her story, on her terms. And as she walked away from the rooftop, she knew that this was just the beginning.